Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome yet again to another episode of Lunch Guide. My name is Chef Andy, and today I've got something really interesting for you all. We're going to be making a very simple tomato soup, and I'm also going to be pairing that with a herb crostini. And just before we get into the main arena, we're just going to start by introducing the ingredients on the table. So from the front, I've got some onion there, and I've got one chili. I've also got some celery sticks there. I've also got some dried herbs, a bit of carrot cubes there, a bit of stock cube. I also have some parsley, some unsalted butter, and some fresh ginger, some spring onions, some celery sticks, a couple of garlic cloves, also some salt and some black peppercorns for seasoning, a bit of tomatoes there, some stock, some olive oil, and just something on the extra side, a bit of greaseproof paper, which you'll see what we'll do with later. And last but not least, I've got this beautiful French baguette, which I'll be showing you how to make a herb crostini. So we're gonna go into a short break, and when we do come back, we're gonna dive right in. See you after the short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you missed out on the introduction, we are making a very simple dish today. I'm going to be showing you how to make a very simple soup. So we're going to start off firstly by just arranging our ingredients. And first off, I'm going to start by cubing my tomatoes. We're also going to have our pot here going. So just give that a bit of time to heat up. Right, and we're good to go. So I'm just going to start off by quickly cubing my tomatoes. I'm just going to cut them into quarters and 4 pieces each for each half. And I'm going to be using about 2 large tomatoes. Right. Once your tomatoes are set, you can probably now start with your condiments. And for that, I'm going to be using just a bit of garlic. So I'm going to use about 3 garlic cloves for this recipe. And we're also going to be frying up some onion with that. So I'm going to be using 1 whole red onion. And one particular thing I like about this tomato soup recipe, this can actually work really well if you're making some soup for yourself for breakfast, or if you're making some soup that you may want to have later on in the day. This is basically a very good option for you. And another thing to also remember is we're also using some very locally affordable and available ingredients. So please do feel free to try this as well. Most of the ingredients we're using today are basically fresh, so we're not really incorporating anything out of the blue. Right, so first in some garlic. Next up, we're gonna peel 1 medium-sized onion. Just start by taking off those skins. And one particular thing you're looking at when you're making soup, remember it's always about flavors, it's always about being as original and as natural as possible. Remember, soup is actually one of the many dishes you can actually substitute your meals with. Right, so I've got my nice beautiful roasted garlic ready to go. Just going to allow that pan to cool off slightly. And we're just going to go in with our half moon chunks of some red onions. Just throw that in there. All you want to do at this stage is just continue to fry your onions just until they start to go translucent. And at this stage you can now start by adding your tomatoes. Remember, they are a bit chunky and they are not very ripe, so you will actually want to give this quite a few minutes on the heat to actually start to soften and break up. Now at this point you actually start to get that beautiful aromatic smell from those beautiful onions and garlic. Now to that we're also going to be incorporating some of these beautiful vegetables on the table. So I'm also going to be adding in some celery sticks. So start by just cutting those into strips and into 1/4 inch chunks. And of course, always making sure to remember to stir your mixture, which basically aids you in evenly cooking your ingredients. Right, so in we go with the celery sticks. I'm also going to be using some celery leaves much later in the recipe. So you'll probably notice that this recipe calls for quite a variety of onions, and that's basically where you actually build a lot of those beautiful flavors from. And as well, I also have some stock here that we made a little earlier, which is just basically just packed with some beautiful flavors. Right, so spring onions in, continue to mix through thoroughly. Right, next up we're going to be incorporating some of the leaves as well. So I'm just going to start by chopping this really coarsely. And one thing also to particularly remember with using a variety of onions, remember a lot of the vegetables we actually leave out in most of our recipes that we try out. We actually miss out quite a bit of flavor by incorporating so many spices and herbs. But the real secret is a lot of beautiful flavors that actually come from those dry or fresh spices are definitely just going to all start over as the ingredients on your table. So I also recommend, if you do have the chance to find even some more different kinds of onions to use, like chives, definitely a good addition to your recipe. So in goes the pieces of carrot. Just continue to mix that through. Right, so we're just going to allow that to continue cooking on very low heat. I'm also going to go in and add the celery leaves. And all you want to do now is just give your tomatoes just a bit of time to break up. And of course, always remembering when you're making your soup, please try and avoid putting a lid on the pot that you're going to make your soup in, particularly for the fact that a lot of that moisture is really trapped in there, and what happens is it starts to give your soup a very, very bland and grayish color. So always try and avoid covering your soup, or any soup for that matter, when you're making some. And just to mention, a good substitute as well, or a good particular pot you can always rely on when making a soup. Always try and pick a pot that's got a very thick base. Remember, it actually gives you much more heat, and you actually don't even need the lid. Another option you could always try is a stock pot, which actually is a bit longer in height, and it actually keeps quite a bit of heat in there. So I'm just going to be working with this particular pot for demonstration purposes. Right, so some beautiful aromas coming through there from the celery, from the garlic, the onions. They're all now starting to combine. Now just something to add over into the pot. I'm also going to be incorporating 1 stock cube. This is just for flavor. And the beauty of the stock cubes as well, they're very nutritious and they actually pack quite a bit of flavor. So I always recommend for you to use some of that. And last but not least, we're gonna add our stock. And basically just allow that to continue cooking. Right. So next up, remember we also have some herb bread that I'm actually going to show you how to make as well. And for that you'll require some very, very simple ingredients. We're going to grab just a little bit of those beautiful garlic cloves. It's about 2 pieces should do. Just start off by peeling your garlic. And do the same for the other piece. Then just roughly chop that because it is going to go into your pestle and mortar. So add all those in there. I'm also going to be incorporating some dried basil leaves. Also going to add a bit of that fresh parsley. So just hold your bunch really, really tight on the board and just start by chopping it really, really finely, as fine as you can get it actually. Just discard the stems, and that also goes into your pestle and mortar. And just last but not least, a bit of some salt just to give it that grinding ability. And then we're also going to chop in there just a bit of this beautiful ginger root. So for this as well, just chop it really coarsely, making the slices as thin as possible to make it easy for you to crush the mixture in the pestle with your pestle and your mortar. And now just proceed to grind your spices, your herbs, sorry. So basically you want to continue pounding that till you've got a very, very mushy consistency. Simple as that. So now transfer your mixture into a bowl. Be sure to also shake off all the excess. Basically just use your finger to clean off the remainder that's on your pestle. And now all you're left to do is add a bit of olive oil in there. Just give it quite a bit of olive oil, maybe about 2 to 2.5 tablespoons. And of course, just to finish off the seasoning, some freshly ground black peppercorns. Right, so we're just going to quickly check on our mixture, and it's still going to take a bit of time. Tomatoes are still hard and tough. So we're just going to allow that to continue cooking undisturbed. Now just divert your attention this way. So give your mixture a nice thorough mix with a tablespoon, and just set that aside and give it a bit of time to just combine the flavors. Next up, we're going to make our crostini. So I'm just going to turn the board around and we're going to go straight into that. Right, so simple as that. First off, grab your baguette. So I'm using a white baguette, but most of you may actually have preference to bread, particularly if you've got some health conscious factors that bind you to it. But I'm going to be using just a white one. This is basically just for demonstration, so you don't really have to use white bread. And all you're going to do is holding your bread diagonally on the board. You're basically now just going to start cutting very, very long slices of that. So I'm just going to start off by getting that corner cut out first. Basically just set that aside and then just proceed to cut your bread into about a 1/2 inch slice. And basically, being baguette is very soft, just let the knife do the job for you. You can actually alternatively just turn it around and hold it with your hand and just let your saw knife just do the job for you. Right, so simple as that. We're only going to be working with the 2 slices for demonstration for today. And simple as that. Now all you need to do now, first of all, begin by reheating your oven. So I'm going to turn this using the top element. I'm going to be reheating that and turning it to about 180 degrees. Next up, we're basically just going to grab some of our wax paper. And these particular sheets of paper really come in handy when you're trying to do something really quick in the oven and you just particularly don't want to really get all your pans greasy. A very, very good alternative for that. So we'll start by just spreading our herb mixture onto the bread. Just like that. So I'm just basically going to apply that mixture on the top side of the bread, giving quite a bit of a generous portion of that olive oil. So definitely one very, very big plus, especially when making crostinis. Right, so your bread is now nice and topped up with the herb. So all you need to do now is just transfer those onto your baking tray. Then just grab a bit of that beautiful butter and using a small spoon, just begin to just put some dollops of butter right over the bread. And basically what this is going to do is it's just going to melt slowly into the bread when it's in the oven, giving you a nice velvety finish with, of course, the beautiful flavor from your olive oil. So just continue to just spread them just randomly all over the top surface of your bread. So about 4 to 5 dollops should do. And just for the record, I'm working with unsalted butter. Remember, particularly unsalted butter is very crucial and it's much more healthy than salted butter. So if you do have an option to use some of that or just to use some regular margarine, it'll still do as well, just as good. So these are now going to go into the oven. Remember, the oven is set at the element at the top. So basically we're just going to be toasting them off the top. And basically the wax paper is basically to cushion all that oil and absorb all the excess oil that drips from the bread, giving you a nice toasted finish. So basically we're going to bake this until they're nice, crispy and brown. So I'm just going to slide those into the oven now. And we're just going to set our timer for about 15 minutes and we're just going to continue keep checking on them. But just to divert your attention this way, our tomato soup is just nicely constituting. And at this stage, I'm just going to turn down the heat. I'm basically now going to just give that a few minutes to cool off. We're going to now, after that, move it into the blender. We're going to blend it and give it a nice, beautiful finish. And then we're just going to bring it back onto the same pot and then just continue to the end. So we're going to take a short commercial break now. I'm going to allow the bread to continue baking and we're going to just let the soup cool off. And when we do come back, I'll show you some very simple techniques of finishing off your tomato soup. And then we also get to see what the crostinis look like. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are just tuning in, we were just finishing off a soup which we're just about to blend now. Remember, we were actually frying this a little earlier in the show and we allowed it to just cool off so that we can actually manage to throw it in our blender and really give it a nice puree finish. So now it's nicely cooled and I'm just going to proceed to fill up my blender. And one particular thing most people go wrong is rinsing the pot, the same pot they were using. I always insist, keep the pot. The flavors are actually going to be in there, so always just save the pot until you're done with making your soup. It will actually make a difference. Now to that, remember this mixture is nice and dry. Remember we just fried it with a bit and we blanch it with a bit of stock. Now I'm just going to add just a bit of liquid just to allow it to blend really easily in the blender. And I'm just going to move it this way. Allow it to rest slightly and proceed. Right, that should be a nice, beautiful puree there. So I'm just going to return that to the pot. Just discard the rest. And actually something I've always insisted one can always do just before you actually waste everything that's in your blender, just add a slight bit of water in there, then just cover it up. And this basically just aids you in just adding some liquid in there so that you can reduce your soup. So this is particularly a good way to actually clean your blender and get most of the other bits that are still remaining inside. Right. All you're going to do now is add that into the pot. And now this is now ready to go back onto the heat. And we can now just give it a few minutes to come to the boil. And then we can proceed to finish it off and season. So I'm just going to allow that to proceed under some medium heat. And now I'm going to divert your attention back to the oven. Remember, we've got some crostinis that we threw in there a little earlier. They're now done. We're just going to take those out. Beautiful, nice garlicky smell really coming through there. I'm just going to slide those off the tray. And simple technique of making some crostinis. Now I think you've managed to be able to see some easy techniques you can be able to improvise on your own. And all you're left to do now is just move those onto the plate like that. Just set them aside. So that those basically work really well as opposed to really just sticking with the same old fashion of making croutons. This is a particularly beautiful one and it's a little more exciting. Now just to check on our soup, it's now nice and thick. Now just to finish that off, we are going to just quickly season that, and for that just a little bit of black pepper. And just give it a nice thorough mix. Right, so our soup is now ready. We're just going to turn that off. I'm just going to grab a plate for that. So I particularly like to use these big, beautiful round soup plates. Remember, they actually really give a better presentation as opposed to using something this size, which is just gray, small, and boring. Now, all we're going to do now is start spooning our soup into the bowl. So about 2 ladlefuls should be a very, very good portion for an adult size. And just to finish that off, I've also got some beautiful basil leaves here. Just going to sprinkle those right on top, and you can actually start getting the beautiful basil coming through. And now just to put a nice finish to it, a bit of a garnish on the side. And one particular thing I've always loved with soup, it always really goes well with a bit of vinegar, but I'm actually going to avoid adding any in here, and I'm just going to serve it as it is, and I would present it just like I've done today. I hope you've managed to learn something today, and you've actually been able to pick something that you can improvise in your very own kitchens at home, and I hope most of all you've actually had fun with us today. My name is Chef Andy, and thank you so much for tuning in. I will also recommend that you check out our Facebook page, leave your comments, inquiries, and any particular questions pertaining this show. And me and my producers will definitely be looking forward to getting back to you with some positive feedback. So until the next episode, thank you for tuning in today, and have a lovely, lovely year, and see you soon.